You or someone you love needs help for an addiction. Where do you turn? Foundations Recovery Network offers individualized treatment for the whole person. Our goal goes beyond short-term sobriety. We address substance abuse and co-occurring mental health issues together, providing a firm foundation for long-term recovery. The first step is often the hardest, but we're here with a free assessment, insurance information, and treatment options. Our confidential helpline is available 24/7, so call 877-714-1318 and discover the Foundations Recovery Network difference today.
Yo, what up? Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks to Humans for bringing us in, and thank you for supporting the show. This is Seth, and you are listening to the Tuesday episode of Sober Guy Radio. On today's episode, I'm talking with Tracy Winchell. Tracy is the creator and host of the Reboots Podcast. But before we get to Tracy, be sure to check us out at thatsoberguy.com. There's a bunch of resources there. You can check out all our past episodes. You could also get information on upcoming live shows and events. And also, if you wish, you could hit me up on Instagram at SoberGuySeth, or you could shoot me an email at seth@thatsoberguy.com. Also, if you'll be in the Northern California area on Friday, September 7th, we would love to hang with you at our very first live podcast event at the Phoenix Theater in Petaluma. We're going to be joined by a good friend of the show and special guest, TJ Woodward. TJ is the author of the best-selling Conscious Being. He's also the author of Conscious Recovery. We'll be talking life, sobriety, recovery, some mindfulness, probably telling some jokes. It's going to be a good time. So if you're interested in that, you could purchase tickets at thephoenixtheater.com, or also there's a link on thatsoberguy.com too. We'd love for you to come out and join us on that. So again, that's Friday, September 7th. I think it starts at 7 p.m. So Tracy, what's up? How you doing today?
I'm dandy. I'm in Arkansas, just probably 25 miles east of the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, which is the Arkansas River. And I've lived here since like 1989. I fell in love with the place. I was always going to leave, go back to Little Rock where I grew up, and we just stayed. And my folks eventually moved here, and about 6 years ago, we lost my dad. And about 3 years ago, I lost my job. So I sold my house and moved 20 miles to a farming community. We've got less than 2,000 people in Lavaca, Arkansas, and I moved in with my mom. My mom, she told the dog today, Mr. Winchester was in her way, right at her feet, and she said, Winchester, in 350 some odd days, I'm going to be 80 years old, and you're still going to be in my way. So we have a good time.
Well, that's good, and I think you bring up a great point. So you went through some life changes
Right.
within the last 5-10 years. Some serious changes, and you've had to make some changes. And during that time, you created the Reboots Podcast.
Right.
So if you wouldn't mind, let's get into kind of your story, how that came about. And you're the guest of the show, so let's hear it.
Well, 6 years ago when my dad died, the loss of my parents was my greatest fear ever. I'm an only child. And so the death of my dad at 80 years old was the realization of my greatest fear. And I decided maybe I was the only person on the planet who had ever lost her 80-year-old dad, which is ridiculous now. I was angry and bitter and furious and frustrated. I screamed at God every chance I got. And I just pushed people away. And I was doing counseling. I was seeing a psychiatrist, worked with my family physician, worked with a friend of mine who is a minister, journaled my way through some scripture. And one of the assignments that I got was to journal my way through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. And man, it made me mad when I got to blessed are those who mourn. That was just the stupidest thing I ever heard. So, things just weren't getting any better. I was working hard, and I've had people ask me, did you just give up hope during that time? I don't think so, because I was working so hard and things just weren't getting any better. And a friend of mine had been volunteering at a Celebrate Recovery chapter 60 miles up the road in Northwest Arkansas. And I thought that was dumb too. But I'd exhausted everything else. And so one day in June, it's been 5 years ago, I'm really terrible at math, but I walked through the doors of a Celebrate Recovery for the first time. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want anybody to touch me or talk to me. I knew one guy there, and I didn't really like him. Turns out he's become one of the dearest people in my life. I got the challenge to try it 6 times. And of course, I'm kind of hard-headed, and I'm not going to be chased away that easily. So I'm going to keep coming back, and I'm going to try it. And that is where I found complete acceptance. I've had a career as a broadcaster, and I've been in this town for a long time. So in all of my years of really public profile work, it was hard for me to go anywhere without being known. And so I didn't realize that after all of those years of being in the public eye, I had developed expectations. My identity was wrapped up in who I thought I was supposed to be. It was wrapped up in what I could do for other people. I didn't trust people. So those kind of stupid self-talk things were revealed to me, and they started to drift away. And interestingly enough, so did enough of my anger that I started to get better. And then I began to understand that every other week at Celebrate Recovery, we read the 12 steps. And then the alternating weeks, we read 8 principles. And there came a time when blessed are those who mourn. When we said that scripture together, I quit gritting my teeth. And now, after 5 years, I get it.
So I just want to go back a little bit, because you talk about something that's super interesting and totally resonated with you. So you had an event in your life, losing your father, that caused a great amount of grief. I'm sure there was probably some unresolved trauma there, and you quickly fell into what I like to call the victim role. You definitely felt like the world was out to get you. And there was, I don't know how you felt. I know when I fall into the victim role, I pretty much hate everything. I pretty much am, FTW, like I can't deal. And so I dealt with that. I dealt with my feelings with substance, first booze and then drugs. Tracy, and we talked about this a little bit before we hit the record button about, recovery, that we all deserve it. You don't identify as an alcoholic. So what did you do to deal with those feelings before you found CR?
Oh, I just let them go. Anything that I thought, I let it go. If someone upset me, I let them know that I thought they were wrong, and that it was all about me. I didn't care how anybody else felt, and I'm not proud of this, but in the weeks and months after my dad's death, it was all about me. It was not about my mom's grief, having been married to a wonderful man for 49 years. It wasn't about 2 of my closest friends who mourned the loss of my dad. It was about how they weren't helping me, right? And family members. I was awful.
Yeah. So you most definitely you. I'm gonna joke about this a little bit. You most definitely fell into the mindset of an alcoholic. You just didn't have the booze in hand, right? Like you were selfish. You couldn't care about anybody else. So that totally is, in my mind, the mindset of an alcoholic or addict. Even more importantly, the mindset of someone that's broken and that needs some recovery in their life. So that's where I go back to, alcoholic or not. I think we as human beings are born with this survival instincts to make us feel a certain way and to kind of change our way that we deal with what life has to throw at us. And if we're using those survival instincts that we're kind of born with, we fall into that. We fall into the victim role. We're selfish. We could care less about anyone. And when we do that, we become detached from our spirituality. And so it sounds like to me that, during that time, someone kind of reached out to you and was like, hey, this is no way to live. Right. I'm going to show you this new path. And that's, so similar to my story, right? Like, Seth, your drinking and drugging is getting you nowhere, right? Like you have some issues that you need to deal with.
You know what? I don't know about you, but like the thing that finally convinced me that she was right is, this had been a friend for, probably pushing 30 something years at this point. And so, this was 5 years ago. But I was noticing a change in her. She was different. And so at some point I just said, what is it that's different about you? And she just smiled, kind of chuckled and said, it's that thing you don't want to do.
Yeah, most definitely. There is something attractive about the way that the person that is in recovery, the way that they live. And for us broken people that aren't, I shouldn't say that aren't in recovery, because that would, make someone understand or think that if you're not in recovery, you're broken. I don't mean that at all. I know that I'm broken, and recovery was something that I needed. Right. And when I saw, I didn't really notice the people in recovery until I was in my earlier days of recovery. And I was like, man, that's what I want. I want what that person has right now, the happiness, the joy, the sense of self-love. Like that's huge too. And it sounds like that's so similar to what you had kind of witnessed.
Yeah. And Seth, you bring up a conversation that happened several months ago. I go to 2 Celebrate Recoveries a week now. So 40% of my 5-day week is spent at a recovery meeting, and I never know which one I'm going to be serving and which one I'm going to be working my recovery. It's a mystery to me which one is which. But we were sitting there having supper, and one of the guys who was there is just really struggling with alcoholism, and we were kind of joking, and he said something about, those people out there, he was sort of envious of them. The way he said it is, they better be careful, or those people out there will wind up being in here with those of us in here who just don't have it together. And I looked at him and I said, dude, it's okay. The beautiful thing in this room is that we all know we're messed up, and we're courageous enough to be doing something about it. And I just pray for some of the people out there that they can find what we found. So let's not diminish our own self-worth here tonight, my brother, because you're in a really good place.
Yeah, no, and for sure. And that's something that, I get a lot of people that ask about the quote unquote stigma of the word alcoholic behind it. And the only thing that I could say to people, I'm very open about my recovery. I'm very open that, I still classify myself as an alcoholic and a drug addict. Like, I tell people that. I tell the waiter, at the restaurant, if he asks me, if I go into a restaurant during happy hour, oh, can we get you a margarita with your chips and salsa? And usually it's like, yeah, you could, but you probably wouldn't like the outcome after 10 or 15 of it. I'm an alcoholic. I don't drink anymore. And I'm very open with that. The one thing that I am kind of challenged with the stigma, and I think it's all kind of self-generated, in being open with my recovery, I haven't had one person, stranger, loved one, friend, family member, tell me like, dude, that's fucked up. Like, you're strange now.
Right.
Every response that I've ever gotten is like, whoa, that's totally awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of the stigma is made up in our own heads. And the true strength of a person, I believe, is the one that reaches out for help. And I didn't realize that until, after I'd been in recovery for 5 or 6 years, that the stigma was in my own head. And I think that,
well, yeah, I mean, when I first walked through the doors of recovery, I'm like, well, isn't that for alcoholics and drug addicts? I'm not one of those. So part of my issue, I was embarrassed by the idea that one might think that I'm one of those. And in fact, I have all over my Facebook page that I'm in Celebrate Recovery. Most of the time I have on a CR shirt, but, and I have a whole lot of cousins. I mean, I have like 60 something cousins, and every now and then one of them will reach out to me, or I'll see them somewhere and they'll say, well, gosh, Tracy, I didn't know you had a drug problem. Well, I don't. And I used to be really quick to defend myself with that. And then, Seth, I went through this other stage where, like, there are about 40% of people in Celebrate Recovery who deal with some sort of an addiction. The other 60% of us are just looking for relief from our hang-ups and our habits.
mm-hmm.
So there was a time when I just felt I'm not worthy to be in a step study or a small group with women who have really struggled and are continuing to struggle. So I went from the side, I don't want to be associated with people who have those kind of problems, to I'm not worthy. I'm just not worthy to be in the same room with someone who has the courage to face the things that you faced. And now, and I still struggle with that every now and then. And thank you so much for comforting me a little bit before we started. But now, I was telling you before we rolled tape, I listened to this conversation between you and your mom in a previous episode. And what a privilege it is to be among women and men who don't have time for a bunch of BS. You're just living life as it's real. You say what's on your mind. And it's just a real blessing in my life.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that much. I have nothing but gratitude for that. I think that it's important, and I'm just going to share kind of what we had talked about, whether you suffer from grief or unresolved trauma, or you were a heroin addict, or you smoke crack, or you were like me, you did a shit ton of cocaine and drank a lot of beers in your life. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what the addiction is. What matters is the path out of that, and how we come out of who we once were and live the life that we're supposed to live the life that we were meant to live, whether it's through Celebrate Recovery, or AA, NA,
Yep.
refuge recovery, whatever that path is for you to return to your natural self, and whatever you suffer from. Like I could give two shits if you suffered from grief, trauma, heroin addiction, crack addiction, alcoholic or addict. We all have the same feelings. And
Yep.
one thing that I am a huge believer in is that, for me, alcohol wasn't my problem. My problem was Seth. And I used alcohol and drugs to not feel what Seth was feeling.
Yeah.
To totally escape out of that.
Yeah.
And I think that, whether you use substance to do that or not, I think you're still deserving of coming back to your original self and getting.
I agree. My friend Ed, the guy I was talking about a while ago, who said, I said, man, I just didn't even like him. He says life is meant to be enjoyed even when it must be endured. And I thought that was the next dumbest thing I'd ever heard behind blessed are those who mourn. And yet through all of the changes in my life, the past 5 years, I have had the 12 steps of recovery to help me navigate these profound life changes. In fact, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I just was really struggling about the death of another close friend in the past couple of years. Just really missing him and being angry with him, and I had a little meltdown with the same people who I was not too kind to when my dad died. And interestingly enough, in the middle of my little meltdown, Seth, the last thing I wanted was to hurt them or to make them feel less of our friend who was deceased. And my struggle was that I had ruined a really wonderful afternoon just because I was emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't stop that. And they didn't know how to help me. And I didn't know how to explain to them why I was so angry with our friend who died without impugning his integrity, which is a totally different way I would have handled grief. And I did handle grief 5 years ago. So the steps of recovery, they don't take away my feelings. They just help me learn how to not make the same mistakes I made before, so that my friendships are my friendships and that I'm living in that moment. Even when my friendships aren't perfect, they're still incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I think that's a super important topic that you bring there, because, whether we're in recovery or not, like we talk about how great our life is and so on and so forth, but we're still dealt with life situations. It's a matter of how we deal with them. And it sounds like to me the difference between you dealing with your dad's death and your friend's death a couple years ago, or it was a couple years ago, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That there was a complete shift in your mindset, that you were compassionate about the others and what they were going through. Whereas before there was no compassion there.
That's exactly right, Seth. Yeah.
So anyway, so we kind of derailed a little bit, but it's all good stuff. So I want to jump back into your story. I think, one big thing that is kind of cool is that, so after your dad had passed, you had lost your job, and you kind of talk about this story in episode 28 of the Reboots podcast, which we'll get into too. So how did you what was that shift like?
Was a lot easier, further complicating things. The friend that I mentioned died, was my friend before he was my boss. Then he was my boss. And at some point, and this is a local municipality, so obviously there are elected officials involved, and they don't get paid enough to make some really hard decisions. But they wanted some major shifts, and my friend rather than make those changes, resigned rather abruptly. He retired. And that kind of took a lot of people by surprise, including me. It turns out that one of the reasons he resigned and retired is that elected officials wanted a number of senior management to be let go, including me. So, see, there's this whole other weird thing wrapped up in all of that. I feel like I let him down because we had just pushed pause on our friendship. We're both ethically bound to serve the citizens of the community that we're employed by. And so that was tough. So as soon as he resigned, everybody's shocked, but I'm thinking, oh, great, I get my friend back. But then there was this interim where we never had a chance to talk about it. Was he upset with the fact that in my grief over my dad, I wasn't a model employee? Was he upset that he disappointed me because he no longer protected me? So that's kind of what all happened there is he resigns. I find out that I'm going to be gone soon. Just a whole lot of turmoil right there. But the steps of recovery caused me then, instead of grieving the loss of a job that I'd had for 12 years and that I found my identity in, I'm not finding my identity in that job so much anymore because of my recovery. Did recovery contribute to my change in how I was doing my job? Yeah. Did it contribute to the fact that maybe someone said I didn't need to be doing my job anymore? I don't know. But it doesn't matter. And so the way I approached all of that, I approached in a different way. I didn't feel like a victim. I realized, oh my gosh, this is an amazing approach for me now. The elected officials have a job to do. My friend made a decision. Good for him. Now what am I going to do about it? And I had a lot of equity in a really cool little 80-year-old house in the middle of Fort Smith, Arkansas. And after talking to my mom about it, I woke up one morning thinking I could sell my house. And I talked to my mom about it. She was like, I was thinking the same thing. I didn't know what you would say about it because I know you love that house. I thought I was going to die in that house. I mean, I love that house. And you know what? That house sold in, we put it on the market like on a Monday or Tuesday. It was gone by Friday.
Wow.
Boom. And so I don't miss that house. And I believe that's only by the grace of God and working the 12 steps and understanding that I'm not a victim here. I have been given relief from tremendous stress. And I've been given the opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do, which is use my broadcasting background to help other people. And through recovery, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book called Boundaries, Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Man, they're just such cool dudes. So I'm sitting just a few weeks after I'd lost my job in just outside Nashville, Tennessee at a Celebrate Recovery East Coast Summit. These two guys over the course of 2 days are talking to us, and we're getting, no kidding, leadership training. And I'm thinking these guys are Fortune 100 coaches. They get paid a whole lot of money to teach leadership skills. And here they are teaching a bunch of us in recovery, wanting to give back. Wait a minute. The leadership skills and recovery skills are the same things. We just call them something different. And I knew right then that the podcast was going to connect those things. And so without losing the job, without selling the house, because without selling the house, I got to get a real job, right?
Yeah.
And so I just have this tremendous opportunity to learn a new thing. And I'm not quite sure where it's going. I've been doing this a year this past May, and I've backed up. I'm not doing an episode every single twice a month is what I was doing. I'm doing one a month because I'm really working hard to figure out this next step. Can I use this as a way to earn a living, or do I need to go get a real job? It doesn't matter. I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that I have a couple questions about that, because obviously I'm fairly new. I mean, I've been around the podcasting a little bit, like being a host on That Sober Guy, or not a host, but a guest on That Sober Guy, and then turning into a host. Right. There's a lot of work that goes along with it, which I'm finding out. It could be time consuming, but it's a labor of love, right? So it doesn't really feel like work. I think, one of my biggest struggles is my struggle with the perfectionism of it making it be the certain thing, right? And when I sit down to work on some show notes or what I'm going to talk about with the guest or so on and so forth, I find myself getting so frustrated, and I just can't.
Yep.
Right. So I want to hear about, kind of like, how is that for you? Because I'm sure, obviously being your background in broadcasting, like you have a good idea on how to prepare. Yeah. And when you find yourself at a block that you're not preparing like how you should, how do you deal with that, looking for that professional or the perfectionism?
I believe strongly in preparation. My entire broadcast career has been built on the foundation of preparation, because when I'm prepared, now all of a sudden I have the freedom to roll with it, right? Because stuff happens, opportunities happen, especially as a broadcast journalist. When you're chasing a story, stuff is going to change, and if I have the opportunity to get a hold of something that nobody else has gotten a hold of, by golly, I want to be prepared. I want to understand what questions I need to ask the governor of the state of Arkansas who's running for president of the United States. I may only get him one time in the next 2 months, and I want to make a whole lot of stories out of that, right? Yep. So I want to be prepared. I was told by an old broadcast pro, Steve Barnes, a broadcast legend in Arkansas, told me back in the 80s, Tracy, for every 5 minutes you talk on the air, you better have an hour's worth of preparation. And I've taken that to heart. So how do I deal with that here? I work really hard to prepare, and I work really hard to be organized. I have a checklist for the things that I want to accomplish. Today, I did an interview for the Reboots Podcast, and for whatever reason, I didn't prepare correctly. I don't even know where the time went this week. The time that I had blocked off to prepare just didn't happen. And you know what happened, Seth? This was a couple who are working to raise funds so that they can go to the mission fields. So, I just went through my little checklist, and I prayed about it, which is whether you're a person of faith or not, I think that is in large part letting go.
Yeah.
For me, it's about tapping into my Creator. To me, yes, I think there is something supernatural that happens, but I think anybody can benefit from prayer because it's about letting go. So just let it go. And we had a wonderful conversation. There were a couple of things that I kind of went, now, wait a minute. I'm not sure I'm buying into this. And we just went with it. And we hit some kind of controversial topics that neither of us was prepared to. But the way I've always tried to approach conversations with people, hard conversations with people when the tape is rolling, is to be kind.
Yeah. Meet every, and I've found that too, meet every instance or anything that may come up to meet that with kindness and compassion. I know that when I find, whether I prepare or not, when something doesn't turn out the way that I want it to turn out, the outcome of that is really a reflection of how I'm connected spiritually to my spiritual beliefs, to my higher powers, to my God. And if I'm super connected, it works out just the way it's supposed to, and it's going to be great. Yep. Right. But when I circle my life around perfection, and try to be kind of, the God or the director of my own life, that's when I really get into trouble.
Yeah.
When a lot of that self-hate comes up, and it's super important in recovery, that I've found is that, this is a constant journey, right? Like it's not a destination. There's things that I have to do on a daily basis to maintain, number one, my sobriety, because that is the first and foremost important thing in my life. And then also too, just like my mind state, you know what I mean? Because when I get into a bad mind state, I'm probably not far from a drink or a drug. And I know that you have something that you're working on constantly, right? To maintain that connection to your recovery, your God. So what does that look like in your program today?
I've struggled with self-doubt the past couple of years based on the changes that were made for me in my career the past couple of years. That's probably been my biggest issue in launching this podcast is self-doubt and figuring out where it's going. I don't trust myself. And as I worked through my inventory this past year, and as I read a book by John Acuff, have you read Finish, Give Yourself the Gift of Done, Seth?
I have not.
Dude, it is awesome. So I'm reading this book.
I'm going to write that down. Right?
And it's all about perfectionism. And I'll pick up the story. If I get lost in this, just pull me back out, my brother.
Yeah, roll it.
He says, if you break enough promises, you start to doubt yourself. And if you quit enough times, quitting is no longer just a possibility. When you start a new goal, it's your identity, and that feels terrible. And then he says, perfectionism dies slowly. It's persistent and particularly dangerous because it masquerades as excellence. So early this year, I'm reading this book, and I pulled this off of my Kindle feed on Amazon, which is awesome, by the way. I just about highlighted the whole dang book, Seth. and that's why it was easy for me to pull up some of these. And so I read this, and I'm starting to work my step 4, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. The self-doubt is not the thing. The self-doubt is the symptom of perfectionism. And so I've worked through a bunch of this stuff with my sponsor. It turns out I have a sponsee who deals with perfectionism. And so I started looking at my step 10. I wasn't really doing my maintenance. And I thought, step 10 really isn't a maintenance. It could be so much more if I do it differently. So one of the Celebrate Recoveries that I attend, I signed up to teach the lesson on step 10 because I knew I wanted to resume that habit. So back in about February, I built a new set of my step 10 questions. And I wanted to make sure that every single night I talked to myself about self-worth, selfishness, self-doubt, perfectionism, and I wanted to just root that stuff out. So I've got 8 questions that I ask myself every night, and I realize how much I'm lying to myself about some stuff. And I have actually put together a little bonus so that if your listeners want to check out what I do, I've made it really easy to do that. I've got it's available at rebootspodcast.com.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes too.
Yeah, and that sober guy. But dude, this has been amazing. You want me to just work through the questions? You have time to do that?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, what good did I do today? Right? So that's the self-worth. And I have to think about that sometimes. I forget. Oh, wait a minute. Buying my mom flowers was a good thing today, right?
Yeah.
Huh. How was I selfish today? So some days I'm thinking, gosh, this was a dumb thing that I didn't do today or that I did do. And by the time I'm finished working it, it's like, well, that wasn't really selfish. It wasn't really selfish that I took a 20-minute nap today because I was frustrated with my my email list management thing. And when I woke up from my nap, I figured it out, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't so selfish. And some days I am selfish, and I hold myself accountable for that. But I'm not as selfish as I think I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just have a quick question on that one. So as you ask yourself that and you work through it, like, what do you do to not beat yourself up over it? Like, how do you give yourself grace because that could be one of those situations that you're like, God damn, I was super selfish today. I'm a horrible person. Like, how do you avoid that?
I don't. I lean into it, and I usually write down what I should have done differently. And most of the time, this stuff fits on one page. Like, and you know what's amazing, Seth? When I look back over the ones where I was selfish, they're the ones they're the ones that are the lengthiest. Like, I don't know. I'm just holding this up. So, like, that's a lot of stuff there. So I just write it out.
Yeah.
And if I write long enough, and I force myself to be brief because it's just on one page. So I don't want this to take longer than 10 minutes. If it takes longer than 10 minutes, I've failed. Right?
Yeah.
So I write my way through it so that I can forgive myself. I put it out there, and when it's out of my head and on that paper, it's not as bad as I thought it was, because I can redeem myself tomorrow by the grace of God, who gives me another day.
That's awesome. And I think, I just, from what I gathered from that, like you said, you don't give yourself grace, but this is your way of cultivating grace for yourself, is to write it out, get rid of it, be done with it. And you do this at the end of the day so that the next time you awake, fresh start. Yesterday was in the past. Like, I'm going to remember it. I'm not going to close the door on it, but I'm done with it. Like, that's it. That's awesome.
And if I've got to apologize to someone, I get that done. So, like, my number 3, and this is another one where I just laugh at myself. This is perfectionism. What did I not do today that I know or think I should have done? Expound. And I don't know. Let's just pull something up here. Random. This was last week sometime. Shoulda. I should have slept better last night so I could get up, walk, and get out earlier. So I didn't show myself very much grace when I wrote this one. It was, but I knew when I wrote what I was getting ready to write was, I didn't sleep very well. So how am I going to beat myself up for that? Right.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of sarcasm to myself. because I know that I'm getting ready to be an idiot to myself and not be nice. But I did identify that the fact that I didn't do several things that I should have done to take better care of myself was rooted in the fact that I couldn't sleep. And that'd been an ongoing issue last week, kind of a racing brain thing. And I know that it will eventually end. And it did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's one of those questions where I'm like, you're going to write something down here and you're going to beat yourself up, but it's stupid. Okay. So I do it and I'm done with it.
Yeah, no, and I think kind of like question number 2, it's, this is the process, and I love this. This is your process of being mindful of it, recognizing it, and washing yourself of it, like being done with it. Like I said, cultivating your own grace in these steps. Like this is, I'm so glad that we get to talk about this, because when you set this over, I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. I like this, but I can't wait to talk to her about it, because so this is all good stuff. So number 4.
Yeah. So number 4 was I unloving or unkind? And you know what I don't like, Seth, is yesterday I was unloving or unkind. A friend of mine called from out of the blue. I'm a very structured person. I have some ADHD issues, and when I have to do too much thought jumping, it just, oh man, it's hard. And so I love this kid, and I took his call, and then I resented it immediately, and I brushed him off too soon. So I was unloving and I was unkind yesterday, and I'm going to do my very best to remedy that. Hopefully Saturday I can give him a call and just say, hey, dude, let's talk. So those are the ones that hurt when I really am selfish. But a lot of times, again, it's one of those, I wasn't so unloving or unkind, but that was. So number 5 follows that.
No, I want to go back.
Do you? Okay.
I want to go back to number 4, and I just is this just like coincidence that it's so much of step 4 in the 12 steps? Like it's kind of you're doing that searching and fearless inventory of how you were unkind.
I've never thought about that.
That's so crazy. And that's number 4 is one that in my professional career that I really struggle with. Because I'm in and I manage a group of men. That's at this facility. It's a manufacturing facility, and all of these men have been at this place, twice the time that I've been there.
Oh no!
And I could get, there are days. I find that when I don't start my day off with I try to meditate for 25 minutes every morning. I find that when I don't do that, I go in a different mindset. And yesterday I had to confess to my wife, like, God, I was so mean to one of the guys today. And I verbalized, like, I have to apologize. Like, I have to admit that I was wrong, and I have to make my amends. So that's a big one. And it's so crazy, right? That, one thing that I struggle with, especially when I don't do my meditation in the morning, is being the unkind person in both my professional and my personal life, and I can't any longer like separate those two. Like I just need to be, loving and kind, you know what I mean? And I think that it's important, that, staying connected, to my spirituality. Like that's cool. But I do think that, number 4 is most definitely step 4, right? So that's
awesome. I
awesome.
never thought about that. You know what? One of the reasons that's on my list, and do I owe someone an apology, is number 5. Those 2 things on my list. I don't know if you've ever hung around cops, but I've got some really good friends who are cops. And when I was a reporter, sometimes those were adversarial, and I used to have a guy who would say, Winchell, I'd put you in jail, but I'd have to do the paperwork. Now get the heck out of the way, you know?
Yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of times, knowing that I'm going to have to do this paperwork every night helps me to make the apology in the moment. That makes sense. Because I don't want to do the paperwork.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to write that stuff down for me to review 3 months later and go, oh, man. Which is, another reason for the perfectionism, because I did check off that I've done the amend. So why am I still grimacing over that thing that's over and done with? Right?
No, I think that's cool, right? So what I'm hearing is that you practice number 4, or you try to practice number 4 on a continual basis, so that when you sit down at night, that list of number 5 of the person that you owe an apology to is either non-existent, or maybe there's one person on there. That's totally. So it's kind of, I'm going to use a little bit. It's kind of your own like scare tactic. You're scaring yourself into being kind and loving to all, so that you don't have to. So number 5 in your book is, the shortest one. And it for me, like, I would say the majority of my days, number 5 would be kind of lengthy, right? And myself would be number 1, right? Because I do tend to beat myself up on a regular. And again, it's those days that I am not connected to my spirituality. It's the days that I hit the snooze button. So now I'm 25 minutes late to the start of my day, and that's the first thing. And I'm working on that. Like, that is always, for some reason, the first thing that suffers is my morning connection. So
right, yeah.
But I think that as long as, like with everything else, as long as I stay connected, that number 5, maybe it wouldn't start with me. So yeah, that's cool. So number 5 is the scare tactic,
right? And you know what? My sponsor reminds me frequently. Do you owe yourself an apology? Be sure when you're doing number 5, you're also including yourself in that. And because she knows me well. Yeah. So number 6, what did I do for someone else today? And some days I miss that. Some days I forget. Oh, wait, I have a friend of mine who's 13 and in some legal trouble. And I spent 30 minutes writing him a really long note today. I forget about that.
Yeah.
And then number 7 is, what will I do tonight to make tomorrow better? Pretty often it's turning out the lights and turning off a baseball game. I love baseball.
Who's your team?
I love the Cardinals, but I also love the A's, because Stephen Piscotty is the right fielder.
I was just going to say we stole your boy Piscotty. We love Piscotty. My good friend Shane, we're really hardcore A's fans. He got to go to the game today and watch him play the Mariners. I had to work, so I was, for some reason I had signal on my phone. I pulled up the Instagram. I saw that this dude was at the A's game. I was like, oh, you bastard! But yeah, no, we most definitely love Stephen Piscotty, and then obviously with the there's that emotional connection with him, with the death of his mother and that whole thing. Yeah. So, but we did get your boy.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. That's so. I digress about baseball. Yeah.
No,
most definitely about baseball.
Totally talk, because both of our teams are doing great now.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. When the Cardinals are good, the Cardinals are most definitely good for baseball, for sure.
I think the A's are fun. I've always enjoyed the uniforms and just that funky kind of a vibe. So yeah, I'm more of a baseball fan than so much a Cardinals fan. There's, life. You talk about perfectionism. You can't afford to be a perfectionist and be a great ball player. You just can't.
That's so true. That is so true.
And I love that. And I love the fact that these guys make decisions based on percentages and probabilities, but there's this human element that, how does a team that was barely above 500 now, how do they win 8 in a row? How does a guy who was batting a 137 in the first month of the season, how is he now batting like, I don't know, 300 and has a 34 game on base streak? How does that happen? It's a celebration of the human spirit. You can't quantify it.
Yeah, most definitely. There's definitely some letting go and self-forgiveness in that, and some self-love as a baseball player.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so awesome.
Okay, so number 8 is my intention for tomorrow. I work really hard at setting the stage for the next day. And some days I mess that up and I put goals in there. But like my intention a week ago tonight, just randomly pulled up, was number 1, to be courageous. 2, here I'm messing this up, was to edit my next podcast episode. And number 3 was prepare appropriately. I have no idea what that means in this moment. But the intention was just to be courageous. I don't know what I was facing the next day. But I work really hard to set my expectations for myself. And in fact, there's another little thing that I do. Every night before I go to bed, I write a letter to my next day self, and it's teaching me to be kinder to myself. And I've already gotten that written tonight for tomorrow. Just sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long, sometimes it's a laundry list of things to do. But I juxtapose that right next to the letter that I write the next day, which is a letter to my Abba. And so I didn't do that on purpose, but I've discovered that, oh my gosh, if I get those 2 relationships right, my letter to myself, my letter to my heavenly dad, I've got a really good shot at having a decent day.
Yeah, no, that's huge. Like the intention, I work really hard at considering my intentions in everything that I do. And I do that number 8 on a constant, right? Like I set my intentions, whether it be goal-based or, how I'm going to treat someone today, how I'm going to treat myself today.
Ooh, yeah.
And then, it's something that I revisit moment by moment, and I also, yeah, absolutely. I ask myself, in times that are tough, like what is my intention here? So it's intention is a huge one for me. And I know that, and then to recognize, like, if my intention is bad, like there's something that I need to change. There's something that I need to do. And I think that, usually in the evening, when, and I'm going to start doing this. Like I want you to hold me accountable. I'm going to start writing this stuff out.
Oh, yeah.
And
Awesome.
hit me up in a couple weeks and see where I'm at with it, because I see, this could be super, super helpful. And I have, much appreciation and gratitude and love to you, Tracy, for sharing this with myself. And then also, the listeners of That Sober Guy. Like this is some really, really good stuff.
It means the world to me. It's a way of keeping me active daily in my recovery. I love being in a step study. I'm not in one right now, and it's super easy. I get scared in these little 3 months where I need a break.
Yeah.
I've got some closets to clean out. I've got some things my mom wants me to do. But I feel spiritually very vulnerable in those spaces between being held accountable on a week-to-week basis with 10 or 12 other women. So this is really important. It is how I actively work my recovery, even when sometimes, frankly, going to 2 meetings a week seems more like a responsibility than working my recovery. This is this thing that reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm better now than I was 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good stuff. So, and I'll share this. I'll put a link to your website, and then I'll probably, if you don't mind, I might have Shane post this up on the web somewhere too.
Oh, I'd be glad. I'm
yeah.
happy to share. This has worked super duper well for me since February. This exact program. I'd gone maybe a year without doing a step 10 every night, and I've messed with this over the past 5 years. I've made it way too long. I've said, oh, I'm going to answer 12 questions and it takes 20 minutes. I don't do it.
Yeah.
So I designed this to just be super duper simple and to be able to do this in less than 10 minutes and to make it really powerful. And so if perfectionism isn't somebody's thing, feel free to replace it with a different question, a thing that whatever that struggle is, that root character defect that somebody's struggling with, make sure you answer that question, something about that every night, because maybe you're not as bad as you think you are in that character defect, and maybe you're not doing as well as you think you are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to piggyback on that, like, I don't think it has to be a linear path. Like, you don't have to wait till step 10 to do this stuff. This is stuff that you could do in step 1, 2, wherever you're at in your recovery. Like this,
you're right.
This is something that, could benefit the person that's new to recovery, whether they're recovering from addiction or grief or depression or whatever, perfectionism, whatever it is. Like, this is something that could be started on now. Like, I don't think that it needs to wait. So Tracy, we're gonna wrap this thing up. I've absolutely loved our time together. One question that I like to close with, for the person that struggles out there, the addict, the person that struggles with grief, that suffers from depression, self-hate. If you had, a couple words or sentences or a whole paragraph of advice, what would that be for the person that is wanting more out of life?
It's hard to improve on my friend Ed Saucier, when he says life is meant to be enjoyed even when it must be endured. It is possible. It's just a kind of a summary of the Serenity Prayer. And so if you just think there is no hope left, have a look at the Serenity Prayer. It's powerful. And when we learn to accept life on life's terms, and we learn how to ask the right why questions, life gets better. And so in my mind, the right why questions, we'll just start with the wrong why questions. Why did this happen to me? It's futile. We're not gonna get anything out of that. And once we accept that, sometimes life just doesn't work the way we want it to. An example of for me, a healthy why question is, why do I spend 10 or 15 minutes a night working my step 10? It's because I don't want to be who I was.
Yeah.
So that's a fear why. And I do want to be someone who encourages and inspires someone who just thinks there's no hope. I want to not just say life can be better. I want to show them through my life, and I want to show them through the stories of other people.
Yeah, and I think you're doing that. I think you're doing a great job. So Tracy, if people out there listening, they want to find out more about you or Reboots Podcast, where can they find you?
You can find me. I'm at rebootspodcast.com. There's an S in there. I'm at Tracy Places, TracyPlaces on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also at Reboots Podcast. It's Reboots Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Or you can just send me an email, Tracy, Tracy, at rebootspodcast.com. I would love to just visit with you about recovery. If you're new to recovery, if maybe your issue is not addiction, maybe it's codependency or just grief or whatever, and you're just not sure if there's a place for you in the 12 steps, I'll be happy to hop on a call with you on Skype or Instagram. We'll talk 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you need. I'm happy to share my story. I am not an expert at recovery. I'm becoming an expert at doing my life within the 12 steps, which is nothing more than the Beatitudes. It is, whether you're a believer or not, if you happen to be a believer and you look at the way Jesus lived his life, he didn't have hang-ups or habits, but think about the hurts that he endured. And so when he delivered the Sermon on the Mount, where the Beatitudes are, he wasn't preaching to people about how to live their lives. He was giving us a blueprint for how he lived his life. And there are help me here, Seth. There are probably 4 steps that are involved that deal with when we make a mistake, right?
Yeah, I think I believe all of them do, but that's
true.
That's my own program. But yeah, I have heard that there are the 4 steps.
So like when I finally figured out that, oh my gosh, Jesus gave us this blueprint for what to do when we screw up, life got easier. I still stumble over perfectionism every day.
Yep.
But I can now kind of see where I need to be. And so, hit me up. I will be happy to visit with anybody, anytime about anything, and just to share my story and what the 12 steps of recovery mean, not only to me, but the people that I love the most. Quick story. My mom has been so supportive of my recovery efforts. And so when her church started talking about launching a Celebrate Recovery, she said, I'm in. I am all in. And she doesn't drive at night anymore. So she said, oh, by the way, Tracy, you're in too until it's daylight outside and I can drive myself home. So that's why I'm involved in a second recovery group. And they love her because she is a greeter. And she is there on Monday nights, even when she is not feeling good. And man, it's just so much fun to watch her giving back to people, and being a big part in why her church launched a Celebrate Recovery. So my recovery, wow. It means a lot to her. And of course that just feeds back to me. So, recovery is not for those who need it. It's for those of us who want it. And I'm happy to visit with people about how my life is different. And you know what? Your life can be different too.
Yeah, that's so awesome, Tracy. I couldn't have said that better. It is the life of recovery. And, for those of us that want to put a label on it, the life of sobriety, whatever you want to call it, it has to be something you want. You can't, no one could give it to you, but yourself, what you believe to be your higher power, what I believe to be my higher power. There's definitely something out there, whether it be Jesus or whoever, Allah or whoever it is, there's definitely, I believe that there's something that helps me or that called me out of that, because I didn't do that shit on my own.
Yep.
And the love that you will feel greet you in these rooms of whether it be Celebrate Recovery, AA, NA, Refuge Recovery, whatever the program is out there is unmeasurable. You will never get that kind of love anywhere else.
That's true.
Tracy.
Thank you, Seth. What a privilege it's been, and I'm so grateful to know you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for listening. Much love, respect, and keep your blood clean.